Hey everybody, Tony Ortiz here back with another Final Fantasy 14 video for you. I just wanted to remake the tier list considering we've got the new patch coming. I also wanted to make it a little bit quicker, cleaner, easier to watch. And then since we have a lot of players out there, checking out Savage content and coming from other games where high-end raid content exists and there's experience with it, I wanted to kind of just do a better explanation of why we're not going to consider Savage stuff in this tier list. If you want to know what the Savage tier list is, you can go and look at the Savage numbers, like what classes were picked for Savage clears. That'll give you an idea of where the game is at. And that's probably why we're getting some of the buffs and stuff that we're going to get. It's good to see that it's all buffs and no nerfs. That's a much better way to do things. But the reason we don't count that is because it takes way too much into account of how good other players can be. And what we want to talk about is how poorly other players can be around you and how good a job is at covering up those weaknesses. Okay, so when you are in a Savage, or higher ultimate raid, Dark Knight might be the best tank in the game because it does the most damage, and that's all you really need out of your tanks because threat, sustainability is just even across the board. Every tank does it perfectly, and Savage people play their jobs perfectly. So your healers are never going to let you die as a Dark Knight in a Savage raid unless you make a mistake. Assuming everybody plays perfectly, it doesn't matter what tank, what healer, and what damage dealer you have. The only thing that matters is, do you play perfectly and can you clear the content? Now, of course, better players who play perfectly are going to gravitate towards the jobs that get the job done quicker. So what they're going to do is they're going to pick the jobs that do the most damage in addition to fulfilling a certain battlefield role. And that's why, like, maybe Red Mage and Bard and, some other jobs are top tier. Even Scholar are top tier for Savage. But and dancers are like, garbage or whatever for Savage. But in every other set of content, this is completely the opposite because Scholar has a movement ability that is super important to Savage to make sure nobody dies. Bard has much better damage, even though they don't have as good of a support as dancers do, which is the reverse from the last expansion. So these are the kind of things that come up in that kind of content. And the reason we don't bother talking about it is because it's such a small percentage of the player base. And again, like I said, you can just go look that up real quick. There's no real subjective part to that. It doesn't matter about how difficult the job is to play. It doesn't matter about how many mistakes you can make or how non-direct or ambiguous some of the decision-making steps you have to make are. You can literally just go look at the list and see this is what jobs are at the top. This is why everybody's taking them. It's the best damage plus the best function. That's not what we're here to talk about. And that's not how they should really balance the game. 90% of the people playing the game, that doesn't matter, right? Okay, so very rarely are you going to see crossover between the best jobs for all the other non-Savage content and the best jobs for Savage content. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go along. So that's just throwing that out there. That's out of the way. We're talking about how good is a job from 1 to 90, how good are they at their battlefield role? How heavily can you carry other people in group content? And what's the total design package? Like, does it function well? Does it have utility? So, like, Black Mage, as an example, has, like, no group utility. Monk has very little group utility. Some jobs have a ton of group utility, like Bard, Dancer. You don't want two of those, but you want them always in combination with something else. So that's part of the equation as well. So we'll throw it down here, and we're going to take into account the patch buffs. The good thing about what's happening here is the only thing that's not just a straight damage increase is there's a pretty big buff to one of the Dragoon's buffing abilities. So it's very easy to see how these buffs are going to affect each job and the ranking of each job, and they're kind of trying to normalize and bring up all the jobs that are a little slower and lacking behind some of the other jobs in terms of like how much damage they do, and that's going to change the end game. But it's also going to have a huge impact on how good they are in regular content. Like just Dragoon alone from the buffs is probably going to be at least a tier higher than I had it in the last one. All right, so let's just go through the tanks first. The most broken tank right now is Warrior. It is absolutely completely busted. It can tank whole dungeons on its own. It can tank whole old raids on its own that it shouldn't even be able to. Like, it can tank Shadowbringers raids. So I think I saw it tank a Shadowbringers raid on its own. Usually you can't solo stuff that's only one tier below where we're at. It's insane. It's also very easy to play. There's really nothing more to say about it. If you like the concept of having a two-handed axe and hitting things like a truck and then being able to heal yourself and letting the healer do damage while you just dominate, play a Warrior. They're really good. Paladin. This is controversial because I had them down here last time, and again, we're not talking about savage content, or else they'd be way down here because they don't do as much damage, but they're almost as unkillable as a warrior is, and they just got a bunch of buffs to their damage. Like 5 different abilities got buffed damage, so there's really no reason not to play one of these. You can not only heal yourself and keep yourself alive, you can heal other party members and keep them alive. Um, these are 1 and 1A. If you want a leveling experience, if you want ease of play, if you want, I can carry people on my back through everything but the like the big trial stuff and the raid content where people can't get hit by mechanics. You can absolutely do it with either one of these 2 jobs. And Paladin sometimes can save people from dying from those mechanics. It has more abilities to save people than Warrior does, but they both kind of have a few things you can save people with. Gunbreaker, insanely good. They're not as good as they were last expansion, but that's just because they didn't get anything new. They have a lot more buttons to hit, and they're more complicated to play than the 2 tanks above them, but they're not that complicated to play in terms of like decisions that have to be made. You do the best stuff when it's up, you do the other stuff when when the best stuff is down. There's a lot of buttons to press, but it's very straightforward. So, I mean, there's no other thing you can do to do but give them an A. Dark Knights, unfortunately, are the worst job in the game for outside of Savage content. There's just no way around it. They have the best damage of any of the tanks, but good luck trying to do it while you're trying to keep yourself alive. If you have a healer that is not well versed in the game and an expert, you will die all the time. And it's not their fault necessarily, it's the other healers combined. Like some of the healers you're going to get with Dark Knight and Scholar and Sage, when they work off shields, the main damage mitigation tool of a Dark Knight, it's a really cool idea, but it's a shield. The shields that these guys will give you and the shields you give yourself don't stack. You also want your shield to break. So you're in this weird spot of using damage mitigation cooldowns, but then your shield won't break and your resources will not get refunded, so you can continue to do that higher damage. It's a really weird design space. Also combined with that, they have the absolute worst death prevention ability in the game. It has been broken since it's been put in. It wasn't too bad when it launched, but in the 3 expansions since, it's just absolutely garbage. Death Knights need a rework. They don't need a full rework. They need a monk style rework. 3 or 4 abilities need to be completely changed. A couple abilities need to be condensed into 2, and some of the things need to be unnerfed. Like they need to take the mana and the life tap skills, the mana tap and life tap skills off of the shared cooldown. That was a stupid nerf. I have no idea why they did that. Healers. White Mage is the best for outside of Savage content because they have everything. They have the best damage of any healer in AoE. They can keep up in single target. They have regen shields, big heals, group heals, and some support. The only thing they're missing that Astrologians have that they don't have is superb group support. They have decent group support. There's not much else to say about it. It's also the easiest healer to play. By far, you have the most options. You have the most panic buttons that actually do stuff without you having to really like make huge, big decisions. So, White Mage, A. Astrologian, A. I mean, again, they have everything. Almost as good a group heals as White Mage. Almost as good of everything else as White Mage. Better group buffs. Better utility. These could be basically ranked the same as well. It's again, this is a 2 and 2A here. They're just awesome. Scholars. I was a little harsh on Scholars last time, and the one thing I didn't think about, which because it never really comes up, is the movement buff that they can give to everybody. It's superbly good in some content and absolutely useless in others. So in content where people are unfamiliar with what they're doing and they need to run fast to get out of stuff to not get hit by it, it's awesome. They kind of lack everywhere else, and again, out of the 2 shield healers, they are better at shield healing. If this was a Savage tier list, they'd be at the top. But that's because the movement skill is so important to that kind of gameplay. It doesn't really matter in much else, and you can't use it until way later. So like it doesn't really affect their like 1 through whenever they get it gameplay. Other than that, they're just kind of missing a bunch of stuff. But this is one of those jobs that I feel like it's way better than it used to be, and it's got a place in raid content now. So like they're not going to rework this because unfortunately, kind of like the way things go is when a job's really good in deep end raid content, they usually don't touch it. Dark Knights didn't get touched for some reason last expansion, even though Gunbreakers dealt more damage, and they were the worst tank. Now that Dark Knights are technically the best tank in Savage, they might get a rework because they might want to bring them back in line with these other guys for super end raid content, and they might want to give them some more mitigation to make their regular play easier. That would ultimately be the dream, right? For these to all be close to each other, but play completely different and accomplish the same job. Same thing here. Scholar's very close. You could even argue it being up here in the B tier. The problem is there's going to be too many jobs that are just better than this. And when it comes to in terms of other roles, in terms of like jobs that are built out that are smarter, that are easier to play, that are less situational. This job is just not gonna have it. It's the best raid killer though. So if you want, that's your game. But we're talking about, like I said, the content that I described, and this is about where they're at. That being said, Sage is basically the same. Unfortunately, it's much more complicated to play, and when newer players start playing the game, they get tunnel vision and they don't realize how much they have to heal and how often, depending on the different tank that they have. They get duped by how much single target damage the Scholar can deal. And, unfortunately, they don't have as many oh shit buttons. And again, as a shield healer, you have to be a little bit smarter, a little bit more preventative with what you're doing. And they just end up getting tanks killed all the time. They get tanks killed all the time. They don't save DPS when DPS needs spot heals. They're just not very good. And they're not very good all around. And it's a cool idea. I like it. I like the concept of the Sage. I'm probably only going to play one healer to 90 if I ever play one. And it's going to be them because they start closest to it. But they just don't have a whole lot of good tools compared to the other three across the board. So there you go. Let's go into DPS. We're going to jump around a little bit here. Let's go to melee first. Samurai. I think I had Samurai somewhere in the top of the last one, and they're going to stay there. In fact, I think they're the best now. They got buffs that they didn't need. They just got like 30 more potency on a bunch of skills and like another 150 on some finishers. They were already insane. They just had some weird movement issues because they don't have like a good get out ability, which Reapers have. But they have a great get in ability, and they have more resources to manage. They're way harder to play. They're still insane though. Like if you get this in any group content, like in your samurais and leading the group in damage, you're gonna have to ask what's going on here, especially once you get to like level 80 and higher. So these guys were all stars last time around. They're all stars this time around. They got a buff they didn't even need, and I think it's just because Reaper's so stupidly broken that they wanted to give them something for raid content. I mean, you won't see the effects of how good Reapers are in regular groups. They're really good, but you won't see how dumb they are until you go into a raid at the end game, and that's where the movement, where they can get out and back in, without using any resources, and then they get a free range attack on top of that. I really underestimated that, in terms of my last tier list. But again, I'm not talking about that content. The reason that they're going to be right next to Samurai though is they do all the same things. They have great AoE, they have great single target, they have a bunch of good cooldowns, they have good mobility. They don't do as much burst damage as the Samurai is going to do in regular content, but like they're going to do almost as much. And we're talking like 1 to 5% less. And they're so much easier to play, so that's why they're right here, right next to them. Let's go to Monk next. Monk is again awesome. The rework, maybe the best rework they've ever done. From considering the state of the job was in before. Again, it's right below Reaper. The only reason it's probably below Reaper is because of new job syndrome. Monks are getting a buff though. It's very small. They only get like one skill getting in some extra damage, so I wouldn't really read too much into this. They just slap so hard, and I started playing mine a little bit more, and once you figure out how to play it, it's slightly complicated. I give it like a 6 out of 10 on the difficulty meter. Once you start remembering all the things you have to do, and you start automatically doing them as muscle memory, monks just kind of go from up here to down here at B to up here in A, easy. All right, so let's go now down to Dragoon. I think I had Dragoon down here somewhere before in the C or D, but with these new buffs they got, they're definitely going to be better. They're definitely going to be more well thought out and packed out than like the Scholar would be for 1 to 90, and then regular raid and regular dungeons. So One of their best abilities, Dragon Sight, is just got buffed to not have this tiny short little range. It's got a regular ranged ability range now. And not only that, the party member that you link yourself to and give them a damage buff does not have to stay that close to you anymore. They can go out to the full distance. They might even actually be able to go further than your cast distance, which would be really nice. And then one of the biggest issues with their abilities and Dragoons in general is that like when they do stuff, their animations are so long that they can often get hit by things. Like you used to be able to jump to avoid shit, and now you kind of really can't. But like we have all these long animations as a Dragoon that you have to deal with. So if you do your abilities at the wrong time, you can just get snap killed by bosses, and you can get snap killed by even mini bosses in AOE dungeons if like your healer's not paying attention. So that animation effect on that ability is going away. So that's one less ability we've got to worry about getting ourselves killed during while we're actually sacrificing DPS to boost somebody to maybe do more damage in the long run. So I like that buff, and then there's a bunch more damage buffs to other abilities. One of them is Star Diver, which is nice. That's real nice, actually. So they're going to be way better than they were before. I like it. Let's keep going in this direction for Dragoon. They are just missing a little bit from being up here. They've got great mobility, good get in, the best get out in the game. It can even be used to go forward. It can be used to go in any direction on a whim. You just have to turn and hit it. And one or two more things like getting rid of those long animations that might get us killed sometime will be right up here. And I think the melees are probably the best evenly distributed, like balanced jobs that are out there. And the last one is Ninja, and I'm going to put Ninja right here next to Dragoon because they're getting huge buffs as well. This one might actually go up. Ninjas don't have a lot of the downsides of Dragoon. They're not as good at helping the party as Dragoon. They have a couple buffs for people around them, but they don't do the same amount here. But once we see how much extra damage they do, because they're getting a ton of damage increases all across the board, they might be up here. So we'll have to come and revisit this one. As of right now, I will leave them in B. But after a week or two of playing, I'm gonna let my ninja main friend kind of give me his opinion as well and see how much more damage he's doing. And these guys might be up here right next to monks and reapers and all that noise. So let's go on to the ranges here. Let's take care of the support range classes first because this is easy. Bards are really good now. The only problem is when you're talking about this kind of content, the only time you'll see them do their A tier kind of shit is in trials because there's more people. So more people benefit from a bard's buff since there's more people around. Dancers, pretty much the same thing. These guys would be an A if you would see them be more valuable, but I'm going to put them down here. I'm going to put them above these two guys. They're really great. They're hard to play through the early game because you don't have any damage. You lose all your cool stuff. A lot of your best stuff you don't get till 60. Both of them are pretty straightforward and easy to play. Honestly, they probably deserve to be up here. These dancers are getting buffs to damage now, which is going to kind of balance them out. They're going to do slightly less damage than bards, but have more support. Bards do slightly more damage than dancers and have less support. But they're both really good. You want one of these in your party at all times if you have an 8-man or bigger. Set a group of people, but in 4s they're kind of like whatevers, right? Like if the one guy that they're paired with on damage is awesome, they'll amplify him and like he'll make up for what they don't do compared to like say these 3 guys over here, or like even these melees over here, some of the range we're going to talk about. But if you have a regular old jabroni DPS, these guys are going to do more damage, and it's not going to be all that impressive. But man, when you get up to raid content, I mean, they're both up here. You need both. Now, Dancer was getting a little bit less love because it did less damage, and since the bards got reworked and the support, that they were lacking got added, they leapfrogged over them in that top tier content. But you really can't notice the difference, when you're doing like a weekly raid finder and like nobody in the raid can avoid getting hit by every single mechanic. So we'll just leave them up here in A. They're super good and useful, especially in that kind of content, and people will always want you in your party. All right, let's go to Red Mage. Red Mage is probably the best damage dealer in the game, and it has nothing to do with their damage. Well, it has to do with their damage because their damage is insane. It's the best range damage in the game right now in all phases, raid, regular content, while leveling, AoE, single target. It's the absolute best. It's also the most complicated to play. So that's going to be something that you might have to grapple with. It's probably the second or third hardest job in the game to play. Um, and the only reason it's not the hardest is because it's only half melee or like a quarter melee, and the rest of it's ranged. If it was all melee, it would probably be the hardest job. But it has everything. It has instant cast, res at infinite capacity as long as you have mana. It has decent heal potency heals, whereas like Summoner doesn't. Inside of a DPS job, and it has a bunch of instant cast buttons. So when you make a mistake, you have things to do while you're waiting for your cooldown. And but it has a lot of mechanics to pay attention to, and it has a lot of niche situations you need to be ready for and be able to hit your buttons quick and fast, and decisively. That being said, though, you need them. They're like the best job in the game when it comes to dealing damage, just because they can do all of it, and like I said, they have all the best utility as well. It's my main job. I love them, but I'm not gonna undersell them. They're insane. I hope they don't get nerfed more. They were nerfed coming across to Endwalker, and they're still the best. So love it. Summoner. Summoner probably deserves to be down here in C, but I'm going to throw them in B just because of how easier they are to play now. I didn't understand how easy they were to play now until I fired up mine. And, like, you have, like, no buttons to hit at all until, like, 86. And then at 86, you get one extra button to press. That's pretty much it. Plus, they get an instant cast res. They have a good group buff. They have good defensive buffs for a caster, for a damage dealer. And their rotation's easy. You pretty much don't have to do a whole lot other than make sure you stat yourself correctly. One thing you'll notice with summoners is that if you do the traditional build that you would on a red mage and a black mage and go for a lot of spell speed, you'll notice that you have a bunch of these times in your rotation where you have 3 to 5 seconds and nothing to cast but your regular old nuke, which isn't all that productive. You're actually better off hitting hard and having less cast time reduction. So what's only weird about Summoner is like it's the one casting job of the 3 that you're gonna want a completely different set of materia gear for. Awkward, but still good. Just doesn't have the utility of Red Mage. That's why it's a tier below. But it's way easier to play, and you have the bonus of leveling up the healer at the same time if you want to. With the your old friend over here, the Scholar. Then we're gonna go to Black Mage. Black Mage, unfortunately, even with incoming buffs, I gotta leave in the C tier. There's just too much movement required in the game for Black Mage to be really good. When you give them a bunch of utility around them to paper over those cracks, like when you have a Scholar Healer with the movement skill that can let them get around, then obviously this is not, as big of an issue. But they don't clear AoE packs quickly because they have to get rolling. Like, they have to get rolling. Once the rotation starts rolling, they start hitting really hard. But it takes that startup time. They don't burst well until they've, fully charged up all their shit, and then they rain death. Again, don't let this, I'll give a disclaimer at the end, but I'll just say it real quick. Don't let this discouraging you from playing any of the jobs. Black Mage is very easy at the beginning and then super complicated late game. Like, once you get to late game, your rotation is very, very complicated, especially if you're going to use potions and stuff. It's just so much work for so little return, and they are probably just almost as in bad of a need of a rework as Dark Knight are for, everything outside of Savage Raiding. They need some stuff to make them better in the big phases of the game that we're talking about here. And then lastly, Machinist, exactly the same thing. You could even argue the Machinist should be up here, but that's just unfortunately not where I can put them. They're not getting enough buffs coming up to really make a difference. They're only getting buffs to their off GCD stuff that's on 30-second cooldown, and that's just not enough for me. Like, they have the best movement in the game. They're the best at certain weird things like Palace of the Dead, I think it's called. Or whatever the tower is, that's the duplicate of it, and Stormblood. They have incredible movement. They can literally cast everything while moving, just like a dancer and a bard can. Actually, no, a bard has 1 or 2 cast time spells, I think. Dancers have literally none. So machinists are there, they have literally no castable, stuff like that. But I don't think that they do enough. They don't have any utility at all. They don't have an AoE combo. They just mash on one skill, and they have 1 AoE cooldown. The little drone guy that they summon is a neat idea, but it doesn't do a whole lot. Anytime you also summon a pet that is like going to attack, you can't control it or anything like that. So like it doesn't do much anyway. I mean, you hit a button to boost it, and like that's all that happens. It gets boosted. But then like if the fight moves, that pet maybe is too far away. It takes time to get closer to like what you're actually attacking to get in range. You can lose DPS that way. Similar to the Dark Knight Shadow. Sometimes you summon the Shadow, the boss jumps to the other side of the arena. Well, that thing isn't always smart enough to get in within range and then leap to close the gap and then continuing. Like it's just whenever you surrender stuff to the AI or whatever, you might be giving up damage and so on and so forth. So I think it's slightly better than Black Mage because it's way easier to play. Machinist has the fewest buttons in the game, bar none. Well, actually, maybe Reaper has less buttons now, but I think it's more Machinist has less useful buttons, and almost all Reaper buttons are useful, which is what puts them over the top. Machinists have like a very, very low to medium amount of buttons, and most of them are never even required to be touched. So they're very easy to play, but I don't think that they have enough to get up here. They need some more juice, and then they'll be up here in this area. So that's pretty much everything. I think what people could do to argue with me is they could argue that all tanks are S tier. Again, I'm talking about how much you can carry, jobs. People might argue that, the amount of damage that the Reaper does for how easy it is to play, it just trumps the Samurai, especially, before the buffs. But now I think you're going to see this come back. You're going to see some Sam mains come back to Sam. So I would concede on this point. I would concede that the ease of play puts them at the top of this tier, but I think everybody here belongs here in this tier. I could also see Bard being better than these guys over here. I could see that being the case made because you're not sacking that much damage and you're gaining like a decent amount of the support that Dancer has. Whereas Dancer before was sacking a ton of damage, but Dancer's getting some good buffs here. Let me go back up to Dancer here. Dancer's getting 5 different skills are getting boosted, so that's pretty good. I think you might even want to do this. You might even want to put all the melees below these two because of how good they can be. But it's again one of those things. These three are all negotiable because they're also easy to play, and as long as the party composition is not, as long as the extra DPS class is going to pull their weight, all three of these guys are awesome. The Reaper, it's just easy mode, right? So these 5 jobs could be kind of sorted in almost any order. Almost. I don't think Monk. I think Monk is probably the net worst out of all 4 of these. Well, maybe Dancer's a little bit, just because this depends so much on the other person in your party. But all this stuff right here, I think you could argue. You could argue differently. These 3 guys are pretty much interchangeable to me. And I think right here we're good. Like I said, you could put Ninja above Dragoon, especially with the new buffs, and you could maybe even sneak them in here. We'll have to wait and see on that one. That one's going to take some more data. But this is it. So hopefully that helps you guys out in deciding what jobs to play. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I don't let this discourage you from playing any jobs. You just want to know how harder you're going to have to work and how much your survival is in other people's hands. So if you are not confident in your healing ability, don't let Sage be the first healer you play. Play White Mage or something first. Get used to it, then try to mess around and practice with this other job. Same thing with Dark Knight. You should not have your first experience in the game tanking be with Dark Knight, especially if you're going to buy a job boost and a story boost and start level 80. You want to be nowhere near this job. You want to play one of these 2 bad boys up here. And I don't know why you would ever boost Gunbreaker since it starts at 60, so definitely pick one of these and then come to this here. Or if you want to get the full story experience, these 2 are great. Healers and tanks obviously have way lower queue time, so if you play Warrior, Paladin, or White Mage when you're starting out the game, if you want to play through the full story, those are definitely great picks. You'll learn the game while you're playing. You'll have a very easy time. You'll have quick queues to get into everything, get out of everything. You'll be able to carry groups on your own as those 3 jobs. I would even probably do this. I'd probably put White Mage right there, and I think that's where we'll leave it, right? So thanks, guys, for checking this one out, and, maybe we'll redo this again at the next patch, and maybe this will be a regular thing. We'll see. We'll probably have to just go based off of how big the patches are. There's a lot of notes in this one in terms of how much is changing for a bunch of different jobs. And also with the perspective of this not being an actual 0.1, right? So this is a 6.08. So this is a small patch. it's a lot of balance changes, a lot of damage increases for a lot of jobs for a very small patch. Usually this is not something that you see, but since Savage tier rating is brand new and they want to make sure that a lot of people aren't caught out in the cold and only play 1 or 2 jobs, they're bringing these other damage abilities up to try to balance that. And it did have a little bit of an effect on like where I would put people in, you know, our tier list here, the basic one. So thanks for chilling with me, and I think I cut about 15-20 minutes off the video, and we'll see you in the next one.